Welcome, everyone. It is Wednesday. We are in the middle of the Republican National Convention. An hour or two from now, we hear the Vice President's speech at the convention in Milwaukee. Our special guest is Ambassador James Gilmore, also a former governor and former RNC chairman under President George W. Bush. And our host tonight are Mark Unkerfer and Jackie Saxton. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Thank you, Dwight. Well, there has been a ton of things that we can talk about. So I guess before we jump into it, and we can decide if we want to go in chronological order or reverse chronological order, starting with today and working backwards. I think first, Ambassador, I want to know, since you were the chair of the RNC, can you take us back a little and tell us what it was like at the convention in 2001 so we can kind of contrast and compare it to what it's looking like today?
Well, of course, I'm not out there in Milwaukee right now, but I think that things are really quite different. That was the candidate that when I was in national politics at that time was George W. Bush. He was the consensus, as I recall, the choice. I don't think that there was a contested election at that time, but it was a much more standard type of process that had been gone through for the delegates. This year, of course, it's a Trump convention, and all the people there were elected by primary. It was Trump won overwhelmingly. So this is not a contest. This is instead an exercise in messaging. And I think the Bush one was also, as a matter of fact, now that I think back on it. The conventions are exercise in messaging. This is 3 days when all the cable channels and much of the networks cover this, and it's a chance to set the theme. So last night, for example, the theme was unity. Tonight, as I understand, it's going to be American strength. Mm-hmm. So it's a chance to talk to the people of the United States and to set the tone for the campaign that's coming.
Yeah. Go.
So I was going to say, I mean, some of what we've seen is considerable change in the makeup of the Republican Party. Obviously, there's been something that Trump has done is kind of transform where that coalition comes from and what it looks like. Last night, we heard from the president of the Teamsters, and we heard from a lot of folks who you would normally have expected to be at a Republican convention. What are your thoughts about the way that President Trump has changed that composition of the party?
I think that the party is much more populist, of course, as we know. But the key thing right now is that's driving the campaign, and the party, I think, concurs with this, is, first of all, the capacity of President Biden. And I think that all the discussion now is about whether or not he's really able to be the president for the next 4 years. And frankly, I think that's becoming increasingly obvious that he cannot. But then also, let's look at the issues. The issues are reasonably straightforward. President Trump was the one who initiated the border issue. Let's make no mistake about this. He was the one. In fact, I believe he did it on the very first day, the famous trip down on the escalator when he announced his candidacy. I think he started talking about the border issues, and that is now a driving issue. All the polling is showing that the country is concerned about the economy, and rightfully so, because President Biden has increased inflation. I think he did it deliberately, or at least with regard to the consequences. And that is a driving issue right now. And then I think crime is an issue. It's been an issue for quite a long time. It's been more manageable under Republicans, but everybody knows now that it's a real issue that's facing people. My discussion has been over the months and the last couple of years, the foreign policy issues. This is a more complicated thing. This is more debatable within the party. I'm really sorry to say. I thought that over the last couple of years, it was pretty clear that we were going to continue to follow a policy of resistance to Putin and his aggression, and then stand strong with Taiwan. I think that issue is under conversation today. And I still feel strongly that I'm right about this, but then, of course, I'm not running for president. So let's see how the issue shakes out as time goes on.
Well, I think that leads me to my next question, which is, what's your opinion of J.D. Vance as the VP pick? Because a lot of his foreign policy positions, not that he is going to be the one in the hot seat as as president are much more isolationist than we typically see from the Republican Party.
I want to be diplomatic about this. I am not an isolationist. I am a person who was the United States ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and Roxanne and I were stationed in Vienna on behalf of President Trump and on behalf of the United States. I am clear as to what's going on in my mind, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to be responsive to your question. We have seen Senator Vance make certain statements with regard to Ukraine and, frankly, with foreign policy generally. What I want is an opportunity to have some influence over this. I want to have an opportunity to have a conversation with Senator Vance when he becomes the vice president. I want to have an opportunity to have a conversation with President Trump when he becomes the president, which I am convinced that he will. And I want to make the case for American international leadership and being at the head of our alliances. So instead, I would prefer to focus on where Senator Vance and I agree. Mm-hmm. And where we agree right now is that the United States has been made weak over the years. He has said over and over and quite explicitly that he thinks that we do not have the resources to fight and engage in these wars at the same time. He believes that we have to build up our industrial capacity, particularly in the munitions industry, and I completely agree with that. I am certain that major conflict is underway and is going to continue to grow unless President Trump is able to express such strength in his leadership that it calms down. That's really the theme of what we're seeing in this convention. President Trump is saying, look, there was no war when I was president. The invasion of Ukraine had not happened when I was president. And I'm convinced that I can do something about this. Well, let's see. But I believe that engagement is underway, and I believe we need to build up our industrial and munitions capacity, and we need to do so right away. Jackie, I'll go one more step further. If this thing doesn't calm down, and frankly, it's in Putin's hands as to whether it's going to calm down or not, depending upon his reaction to President Trump. If it doesn't calm down, I am convinced that we are going to be fully engaged worldwide. And if that's the case, we're going to have to move to a much more aggressive economy and policy in order to be able to defend ourselves in the conflict that is growing.
And we'll see if President Trump can keep his promise that he said that he could end these wars on day one. Now, look, try this out with me. Secretary of State James Gilmore. How's that sound, right?
That sounds good. That sounds good to me, but I'm not counting on it. But go ahead.
What else you got, Mark?
Well, let me jump in. I mean, one of the issues that we're really trying to figure out is what is the end game for the war between Russia and Ukraine. Arguably, Putin has made just a catastrophic strategic blunder in all of this. He has taken the lines of NATO and seen them extended with the entry of Finland and Sweden, and that has been the notion of Finlandization, the idea of having a neutral buffer state on the border with Russia or Soviet Union, has always been a kind of core part of their policy. Any kind of even temporary settlement between Russia and Ukraine would involve, in effect, putting a state that would be hostile to at least a Putin-led Russia, move the boundaries like that. What is the end game for this for Putin?
Let me speak about this in a little different way. I want to start off with a hypothetical, and then I'll explain why I'm asking the question.
Sure.
Why is it that Americans are so interested in an endgame, particularly for this Ukraine war? I cannot figure it out.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Let me respond to that. I think one of the concerns, let me take it a step further. I mean, there is a concern that the U.S. policy has been to restrain the offensive nature of Ukraine's response to Russia. We're not allowing them to use weapons to challenge the Crimea. We're not allowing them to use weapons to more offensively attack Russia. Essentially, what we've given them is a stalemate defensive war to protect themselves. So the concern is that over a long period of time, a protracted period of time, Russia has the capacity to throw resources, human beings, at this war at just what would, for an American or a Western perspective, be an unconscionable level, but they're in fact doing that. And that there is a war of attrition that over a period of time can just simply bleed both countries dry. And that Russia has the, let me complete the thought, that Russia has the upper hand in that scenario simply because they've got more bodies, more humans, more resources in order to continue the fight.
Well, that kind of war is probably one that we ought to be encouraging. Let me say this. You said that Putin may have made a mistake. It isn't a mistake if he wins. If Putin wins, it never was a mistake. So it's incumbent on us to make sure that Putin loses.
Well, but let me push back on that, though. I mean, Putin, it is a mistake. I mean, part of the strategic challenge Putin faces right now is that were he to, quote, enter Kyiv or take over, he'd likely to have a kind of protracted Chechen situation. So he really is sort of taking a tiger by the tail, so to speak. Again, I would argue that Putin has made a strategic blunder of a colossal nature.
Well,
but go ahead.
You're not pushing back. You're pushing through an open door.
Right.
We agree completely.
Yep.
That Putin has made a mistake. He's already lost. Listen, he wanted to really take over. My position is clear. He wants to take over Ukraine. He wants to eliminate it as a country. At worst, murder everybody and imprison everybody that he can get his hands on,
right.
And then begin the process or continue the process of reestablishing the Russian Empire. That's what I think he's doing. I think people that think that somehow that he's reacting to NATO being closer to Russia is nonsense. NATO is not a threat to Russia, and even if they think it is, we don't have to engage in his delusion. Countries under OSCE principles and Western principles, countries have a right to do what they want to do if they're a sovereign country, which Ukraine is. Putin doesn't think that they're a independent country. So let me agree with you again. It is fundamentally a loss for Russia that Sweden and Finland have joined NATO. Right. It is a profound change. I may have actually said it on this program before. Yes. I believe that the admission of Finland and the acquisition of Finland into NATO and Sweden into NATO is the most important development in Europe since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it was a terrible blunder for Putin to engage in this and drive the Western alliance closer together, which it has done. Now, I want to also agree with something else you said. I want to criticize President Biden. President Biden is generally on the right track, but he hasn't done enough. He's basically sent only enough material to keep them alive. Look at, by the way, the progress of this. If you start with Obama, who sent nothing except, I believe, some ready-to-eat meals for the battlefield, to President Trump, who sent Javelin missiles, which, of course, turned the tide on the battlefield at the beginning, to the progress that's been made up to this point. But Biden's still not doing enough. And the reason he's not doing enough is because Putin has got his number. He's threatening nuclear weapons, and therefore he's frightened by Biden. Biden doesn't want to be the president that ended up in a nuclear war. So Putin's got him. This is the same thing that the old Soviets did, and the fellow travelers in America, better red than dead. So this is the same kind of process that we saw before. But I want to make this point, Mark. I believe that all the tea leaves are showing that the Russians are cracking. I believe they cannot sustain this war. They have lost somewhere between 350 and 600,000 men. They have lost almost all of their armored vehicles. Their economy is in a shambles, other than the fact that they can export oil to other enemy nations. They are, I believe, cracking. The reason, in my judgment, why Putin is asking for a ceasefire is because he's losing. That's why he's asking for a ceasefire. The Ukrainians are not asking for a ceasefire. They're fighting for their lives, and they're going to continue to fight for their lives. And the longer that this war goes on, the worse it is for Russia. I actually agree with you. I think that it would be better if the United States gave enough material in order to be able to defeat the Russians and push them out of Ukraine. But I think that this is inevitable. I don't believe the Russians can continue this war.
So I was going to say, let's shift to the biggest piece of news in recent history, but there's so many things just from the past week. But let's start with the assassination attempt. And I mean, I think so many people have said everything that is to be said about how it's horrible and should be condemned, and both sides have said that. But I want to talk more about the investigation and the lack of, it seems, transparency that's coming from the Secret Service, and just all the little bits of information that are coming out. The fact that the local police chief, there isn't one in Butler, Pennsylvania at the moment, things like that, and that the Secret Service is trying to throw the local police under the bus. It's just like, and there's so much mistrust in our institutions that lack of transparency is leading to inevitably conspiracy theory. So what's your take on that investigation, and what's the best way for congressional Republicans to get the answers that we deserve, quite frankly?
Well, I believe congressional Republicans, particularly in the House of Representatives, are going to be able to get the answers. Frankly, the Democrats ought to want the answers. This is a dangerous situation. And let me pause by saying I have said publicly that I believe President Biden is guilty of this. He is the one who has been using this strident, shrill language out on the campaign trail because he doesn't have much else. Can't talk about inflation. He can't talk about crime. He can't talk about the border. So instead, he makes up this thing that says that if the Republicans win, the democracy is going to be in danger. So then he uses words like that President Trump is a menace. He is a threat. If he wins, democracy will go down. I believe that kind of language is if you follow the logic, is if Trump's going to win anyway, then that encourages deranged people to commit assassinations. And that's number one. So I have said that I think he was guilty of this and he ought to stop. The second thing I want to say is never mind who else is saying what in this campaign. The president of the United States has a higher duty and a higher responsibility and a higher credibility than anyone else. When the president speaks and accuses someone basically of treason, people ought to listen. And it's not true. And President Biden should not be saying these things. And he should be apologizing and stopping right now. Now, the third thing is, this is a strange thing. I personally am sad that they killed the assassin. You know, frankly, I mean, we were about to get to the bottom of the John Kennedy assassination until Jack Ruby assassinated the assassin. It's sad. I'm sorry about this because I think we should have been able to get this kid into custody and find out what's what here, because so far nobody has presented any facts that he was mentally deranged, although he was building bombs and carrying his rifle around. And then finally, what's he doing up there? I mean, how in the world did the Secret Service allow that close a range opportunity for a shooting station against President Trump? I just I really don't understand it. And you cannot throw this off on the local police force. They are there for crowd control and making sure that people weren't bringing firearms into the event and that kind of thing. It is the Secret Service that had absolute responsibility for this. What in the world were they thinking?
Right. Well, do you buy the excuse? The excuse that Kimberly Cheadle is giving is that the roof was too sloped to put somebody safely up there. I'm like, that's not true.
Well, she can't really have said that because after all, the assassin got up there.
That is the exact excuse that she has given, is that it was too dangerous because of the slope of the roof. And it's not even pitched. It's like totally level.
Well, first of all, it isn't true. And second of all, the assassin got up there. And third of all, the risk has to be calculated. The report is that before he fired, that a policeman started to come up the ladder and got up onto the roof, and he only went back down again when the guy pointed the gun back at him, which I don't disagree with. Well, what was he going up there in the first place if it was too dangerous? Right. That's ridiculous. It's just absolutely absurd. And besides, their fundamental duty is to they can take protective actions, but they must secure the line of sight against the president of the former president of the United States, or the president for that matter. That's their duty.
Well, and the more we're hearing about it, the more details we're getting, the worse it's looking for the Secret Service. So today they reported that the Secret Service knew up to about an hour before the incident started, that about this kid. That people were reporting, hey, there's this sketchy guy. He's got a rangefinder. He's got like a backpack. And then of course they're like, he's got a ladder. He's got a gun, so there was an hour of time. And even if there was just a whiff of, hey, there's some sketchy dude walking around, we don't know what he's doing. Why did they let Trump go on stage in the first place? Right. So the more we're learning, the worse it gets.
Sure. We don't know if it was the police that saw the rangefinder or any of that kind of thing, or the fact that he was sketchy within the normal security processes. Was there not a plan in place for that officer to go to the Secret Service and say, hey, look here, this doesn't look right? Was there no plan like that in place, where there's no briefing to make them do that? It's just, look, play the hand out. It's not that complicated. This is a mistake, and nearly a fatal mistake. We were all very lucky that President Trump wasn't shot. So the head of the Secret Service simply has to come forward to the United States Congress and say, we didn't do this right. We made a mistake. It was almost fatal. We were wrong. Now, does that automatically mean she should resign? Frankly, I'm tired of all these resignations, but the fact is that at that point, it's up to the president of the United States as to whether she should be fired or not. If she wants to stay and say, we made a mistake and we're going to change and we're going to do things better, then it's up to the president to say, well, our bad. We'll just keep you and let you do your reforms. Or whether the president is going to say, no, it's time for a change. You do something else and we'll put somebody else, a real security person, in charge of the Secret Service. That's the way I would handle it. And I'm amazed that we haven't seen any further initiative on this up to this point, other than her stonewalling.
So one of the related issues is the protection of other candidates. And one of the decisions that was made this week was, of course, Robert Kennedy Jr. Did not have Secret Service protection. And then he's gotten it since then. President Trump actually asked for that, and then the Biden administration changed. That was a decision not made by the Secret Service itself, but by the Secretary of Homeland Security, who, of course, is in the process of being impeached, right? Or has been impeached and is now going over to the Senate. It's disturbing, I guess, and I guess I want to get your thoughts. Is there an inference that politics is being played in the decision to provide security protection? And is that something that we really ought to be looking for as well? Again, because this is not a Secret Service decision that was made. It was one that was made at a higher level as to which candidates would get resources.
If I were president, there wouldn't be any doubt about it. Anybody who's a legitimate candidate for president out there should have Secret Service protection. And it's clear that the three at this point are Trump, Biden, and Kennedy. Yeah, sure. Kennedy's a bit of a gadfly, but he is running, and he's running legitimately. He's being interviewed all over the place as a candidate and get his views and so on like that. So the question I would have for the president is Robert Kennedy a target? If he were assassinated, would it make headlines? Clearly, all those things are true, particularly in light of the history of of Robert Kennedy being shot, John Kennedy being shot. So it's an easy call for Robert Kennedy. Now, the other people who actually are gadflies, I think you have to ask that question as to resources. I just don't know the facts as to whether the resources are there. But the others, of course, are much lower profile. But frankly, I think that I want to say this. To the extent that resources are available, security ought to be provided to these people running for president of the United States. Why? Because the environment has been set by the president in a shrill way. He is now responsible for the environment that we are in.
So turning to the current president, I think he thought he got a little bit of a reprieve. He's like, a little lucky with, Trump being back in the headlines that, okay, they're going to stop calling for me to drop out now. but that lasted like 2 days, about as long as the let's tone down the rhetoric lasted. So now you have Adam Schiff coming out publicly. They're saying Chuck Schumer is trying to get him to step down. So how's it looking for Joe Biden? Do you think he's going to make it to November? I mean, now they're calling to delay the vote to make him the nominee. It's supposed to be on August 7th. They're trying to push it back.
Well, I hadn't seen that, but there are several things. First of all, the Democrats made this bid. They're going to have to lie in it. They're the ones that offered him up all year, put him out there in all the primaries, which he won, of course, as the incumbent president. And now they got him. So now they don't like the way the polls look, and they don't like the way the president is being revealed. Well, they all knew what the president was like when they did all this. So they're responsible for this. I think and unless Biden voluntarily steps down, I'm not even sure what the rules are involving that, but let's assume he steps down, then his delegates are free, and all of a sudden it's a melee and a free-for-all. And at that point, you're going to have a whole bunch of candidates out there preparing to run 4 years from now, because none of these last-second people are going to beat President Trump. So, if that's kind of where this is, I think that they're stuck. And furthermore, if he quits now, you've got Kamala Harris, who was a DEI appointee as vice president. She hasn't distinguished herself as vice president. If he gets out, she is president, and she's going to run for president. Mm-hmm. There are other people in that party that are ambitious. You've seen them all. I could write them all down for you, but they would all like to run, but they're not going to beat President Trump at this point. And I think they know that. So at the end of the day, I think that President Biden is going to stick. He's stubborn anyway. I think it's the only chance they've got. And let's face it, the country's still divided. President Trump is not beating President Biden by 10 even. So there's plenty of time for that race to change around depending upon circumstances. I don't think it's going to. I think President Trump's going to win. In fact, I believe we all think he's going to win. That's their best bet in my view. But I think that they really look silly as a party with people like Schumer and these people out here trying to save themselves by throwing the country under the bus by throwing President Biden out. Really looks bad for them. And meanwhile, we're offering unity.
You raise an excellent point, which was that many of these same people who are now making this request of Biden, they've been meeting with him for 3.5 years, and were well in a position, weren't they, to be able to make an assessment that millions of Americans made on their own when the debate took place.
Mark, I actually want to, I don't mean to be difficult, but I'm not running for anything. So I can tell you the truth. I think that I watched Biden give his NATO speech. And to tell you the truth, he actually seemed to have a grasp, I thought, of all the international relations issues. I thought he comported himself very well. I do think that I've watched other speeches in which he loses his temper. He screws up his face. He becomes angry and starts to shout and call Trump names. And that's kind of like old man kind of stuff that he shouldn't be doing. So I think the temperament is bad for him. I think his look is terrible. Obviously he's not as alert as he once was. That's perfectly clear. So I think that it is his look and his capacity to speak well and to appear to have a handle on things that is costing him the support of people across the country. Now, there's a second issue, something we're really not getting to yet, and that's the issue of the issues in this race, the policy in this race. The Republicans have almost all the advantages on policy. We haven't even gotten there yet. It's perfectly clear that President Biden created this inflation. He did it deliberately. He tried to throw money out of the door, whether he was buying votes or whether he was just a socialist. I don't know what it is. But he had to know, I knew, you knew, we all knew he was going to create inflation. Then he gets high inflation. And he says, oh, my gosh, I've got high inflation and my poll numbers are dropping through the floor. Now I got to do something. We're ahead on policy on the border. We're ahead on policy, on inflation, on crime, and so far, I think that we haven't made any fundamental errors on foreign policy yet. In my view, we're going to win on policy. We're going to win on image. I think we're just going to win.
And I feel like people aren't even. I mean, I think there definitely are rank and file people who are looking at it from a policy perspective. But I feel like at this point, so many people are just looking at it as like, which of these older men is less feeble and more able to actually do the job and, as you said, purvey strength, which is so important, right? I think every single one of our enemies who watched that debate, who've watched Biden, mess up on screen. You said you watched his NATO speech. He referred to President Zelensky as President Putin.
Sure.
Like these are the kinds of things that are making our enemies salivate and gear up to attack, especially like if Trump wins on November 5th, there could be chaos from our enemies between November 5th and January 20th.
Well, and I believe that the Republican position that a vote for Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris to be president is accurate. I don't see anything that indicates that Biden can do 4 more years. He's positioned of strength in his party because the party offered him as the president and nominated him. It is Biden who is now in a position of strength in the political process. But he probably ought not to be. If he had stepped out as a winner and said, look, enough's enough. I mean, he may yet, by the way, today on COVID, he may say he's too sick to campaign and he's going to withdraw. He may do that. But right now it's in his hands. They can't get rid of him any other way. And therefore Trump's going to win, in my view.
Yeah.
So we were talking, and you appropriately mentioned that we have not focused on the issues. We're talking because of, I think we can understand why we're focusing on the individuals themselves, because that's such a dominant set of topics to talk about. But what are your thoughts about some of the changes in the Republican platform? We've got a scaled back from where we were in 2016, and let me just do a digression. I confess I'm a little jealous because I was on the platform committee 4 years ago and we didn't do anything because of COVID and we couldn't meet, and we just simply adopted the 2016 platform and carried forward. So this was the first real effort to be able to shape what the Republican Party stands for in 8 years.
I will say before he answers, I don't think you missed much, because I've heard from a couple of my friends who are on that committee who said that they were given like an hour to review it and that they were just like, okay, we're voting.
I have not read the platform from beginning to end. I did read the foreign policy piece because that's the part that I'm most concerned about. Let me repeat, as a diplomat and as a politician, that I'm not interested here today on this broadcast to criticize President Trump or Vice President nominee Vance. I'm not interested in doing that. What I hope is that I can offer some advice, be in a position to offer some advice, and to make my case as to what I think the proper role for America and what it ought to be, and make my case based upon my experience, both as a politician and as a diplomat. But in answer to Jackie's point, platforms are not supposed to be so specific that they can be torn to pieces by the opposition. And they're especially not supposed to be so a platform that is contrary to the candidate. The candidate is supposed to have influence over that platform so that the platform supports the candidate's campaign. And in this particular one, I believe is so general and so ambiguous that it can do that. I believe there's plenty of room here for President Trump to work within that platform in order to be in harmony with the Republican Party and its platform, because it's general and it is supposed to be general, and I don't criticize it for that. As a matter of fact, I think there's room in that platform on the foreign policy side, I'm pleased to say.
So I think the most notable difference, and I think that that's what Mark was hinting at here, is that for the first time in 30 years, the Republicans have changed their platform on abortion. So it says basically that it's anti-late term abortion, pro-IVF, and I think that's where it ends. And Now, I personally think that it was a smart move to make because that's been the cudgel that the Democrats have been wielding since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But and Trump has, as you said, it should align with Trump's views, and that's where he's publicly come out and said it should be a states issue. That's what the platform says, that we don't support a national ban on abortion. So, and that's drawn a lot of ire from the pro-life community.
Well, the pro-life community is part of the Republican base, to be sure. But at the end of the day, the President Trump has basically said, look, I put the justices on that produced an overturn of Roe v. Wade. I've been asked over my political career, and I've said that I thought that analytically Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided. But at the end of the day, what the Supreme Court did was not eliminated all rights. Instead, they threw it back to the states. And that's what President Trump said should have been done. So the case now is back to the states. And now it's going to have to be fought out in the states. But that, I believe that it's had the effect of taking the issue very much off the table at the national campaign.
Yes.
And that is very important. It's perfectly clear to me that on policy, the Democrats were going to lose on virtually every issue confronting the people of the United States, except that one issue, which is a divider within the Republican Party and within the nation. By taking that off the table, what do they got?
Right.
What do they got? And the answer is, well, because the Republicans are going to destroy the democracy.
Right. So something else you just said triggered my other question.
Pardon me?
Something you said triggered my other question, which totally just came to my mind. There's been so many things this week, it's hard to keep track of all of them. Another thing that Joe Biden came out with, I don't remember if it was today or yesterday, I think it was yesterday, is that he's going to put forth new legislation for proposal to put term limits on the Supreme Court and I think it was an enforceable ethics code. Now, I don't think it's going to pass the House, so it's probably dead on arrival, but what is your opinion on that?
I can't stand it. It's just terrible. As everybody on this call knows, I'm a former defense lawyer that tried cases referring to that Constitution. I prosecuted, and I was the Attorney General of Virginia, and I'm still a lawyer. And the attack on the Supreme Court for political reasons is an attack on the democracy. So, it's projection. They basically say, well, the Republicans are trying to destroy democracy. Everything that we've seen this year has been an attack by the Democrats on democracy and on the Constitution. The criticism of the Supreme Court, I have actually criticized the criticisms of the Supreme Court, which have been going on and on and on. The president, I think, has a duty to be respectful of the Supreme Court under the Constitution. They are managed under a different article of the Constitution. And I believe that this is an attack on the Supreme Court for political reasons. We have to give some dignity to the court that's trying to decide the matter based upon the Constitution and the law. For the president to turn around and say, well, I don't like the political results, so I'm going to attack the Supreme Court, I think is, look, I tend to say that it's ridiculous, but I prefer to say it's wrong. It's wrong. It undermines people's confidence in our Constitution and our rule of law.
Yeah, I liken it to how the Democrats in 2016 tried to call for the end of the Electoral College because Hillary Clinton lost. I'm like, well, if she had won, you wouldn't be calling for the end of the Electoral College. So it's just, you can't just do things when it's convenient for you.
Just so.
One of the issues that is out there is the idea of having a constitutional amendment to limit the Supreme Court to 9 members. That's obviously been the practice for, I can't remember when there was it. I think over 160 years ago, there was a time when there was less than 9. And there has been some fear that there would be an effort to expand the court. There was actually a commission that Biden proposed or had it that considered those options. What are your thoughts about this, having some kind of legal, whether constitutional action to sort of protect the Supreme Court as we currently have it composed?
The Constitution protects the court, in my view. I suppose that I haven't done the research to determine what legislative supervisory capacity the Congress has in terms of term limits or other issues like that. But I remind everybody that Franklin Roosevelt didn't like what the court was doing, so he attempted court packing. He attempted to expand the number of the court, which he then would appoint, and then he would get the type of results that he wanted, and he failed. And furthermore, not only did he fail, it's much more important, he not only failed, everybody agreed it was wrong. It was a good thing that he failed. Everybody, that's the key. It's not just a political failure. Everybody agrees that it was wrong, and it's still wrong. And President Biden, I mean, people say that he looks desperate, but I think it's worse than that. I think that it's a moral and legal wrong that he's doing to the people of the United States by attacking the court.
Do you think that the Democrats, if they see the writing on the wall that they are not going to win the White House, that they're going to try and I think they're inevitably going to lose the Senate as well, that they're going to try and pressure Justice Sotomayor to retire so that they could try and put somebody in before Trump retakes office?
Sure.
Do you think she'll go?
I think she likes being justice of the Supreme Court. And let's see, I'm trying to remember right now. Please forgive me. The immunity case disagreement was written by Sotomayor, or was it written by Kagan?
No, it's Sotomayor.
Sotomayor, yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Well,
the really inflammatory one. Yeah.
Oh yeah. If you read it, I read the dissenting opinion. I read it. I read the immunity case, and I read the dissenting opinion. I even read the concurring opinion to the dissent. I read all of that, and the dissenting opinion was an act of pure fury, highly emotional, not very analytical, and I think she likes being on the court. So, frankly, I'd be very surprised if she retired for some political reason. I think she has I think I don't think she's a pure politician. I think all the justices are trying to obey the law, one way or the other. And I'd be surprised if they could force her out, frankly.
Well, we're now coming towards the end of the show, where we talk about Missoni's restaurant up in Baltimore County, where Jackie and I will sometime soon be having dinner after the show, won't we? Yes. Because of the wonderful Italian food. Dwight forces us to get that in. But Ambassador, could you talk about some of the other issues that and I'll turn to Jackie. I know I've seen a couple of appearances recently. I know I get the alerts for that, but can you talk a little bit about some of the media appearances that you've been involved with recently?
Well, I have. Let me back up one step and say what I'm doing here. I'm not in public office. I don't have a plan to run for public office as things situated right now. So I had to make a decision about how I could make a contribution. I mean, I could just retire and play golf. I mean, I don't have to do anything. But I made a decision that after a lifetime of public service and having been governor and been ambassador, that I have a contribution to make. Therefore, I have been aggressively reaching out and speaking out on the issues of concern. And that means that I'm appearing very frequently. I'm on Richmond radio, which actually has a very broad reach, every week. Lately, I have been invited to be on Newsmax very frequently. In fact, I'll be on Newsmax tomorrow morning, as a matter of fact, at 7:40 a.m. I was supposed to be on this morning, and they pulled it at the last second because of something that was going on. But then they asked me to please come back on tomorrow morning. I would certainly like to be on any of these outlets that I can be on. I was interviewed last week by the Wall Street Journal. I've been contacted by many of the written outlets, a lot of the television series. I was on Fox Business just a couple of weeks ago. Why am I doing this, Mark? I mean, why am I doing this? I don't need to be doing it. I'm doing it because I believe in my country, and I believe that I can make the country better. Why would you invest a lifetime in public service and trying to do the right thing as a conservative and then just stop? Why would you do that? And I've decided to continue to proceed on. Once I begin to take more golf tee times, you'll know we're all in trouble. But I'm not.
Not yet.
No,
We're appreciative of your commitment to continue to be a thought leader and an advocate for
Absolutely.
conservative principles.
And if you run into our friend of the show, Matthew Foldy, on Newsmax, you'll have to let us know.
Well,
I think he's on there most days.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate your coming, your returning, and being one of our regular guests. And thank you for your very thoughtful comments.
Yes.
I'm grateful. I'll come to Maryland sometime and you can take me to that lovely restaurant.
There you go.
And thank all of you for watching and I guess letting us be your intro act before tuning in to see JD Vance give his speech as our VP nominee. And we'll be back next week with another episode.